The scorching Arizona sun had turned the canyon into a furnace of death when Samuel Turner heard the first scream pierce through the howling wind. His calloused hands froze on the rusted pickaxe as the sound echoed off the sandstone walls like a banshee's wail. It was a woman's voice, raw with terror, speaking in the melodic cadence of Apache tongue. Sam's weathered face, marked by 3 years of failed prospecting and broken dreams, turned toward the sound with the wariness of a man who had learned that in Apache territory, curiosity often meant death. The wind carried with it the acrid smell of gunpowder and something else that made his stomach clench with dread, the metallic tang of fresh blood. He should have mounted his worn-out mule and ridden hard toward the nearest cavalry outpost 30 miles south. Every rational bone in his body screamed at him to flee. The Apache had been on the warpath for weeks, ever since the massacre at Skeleton Creek where a group of drunk miners had butchered an entire Apache family, including children. The newspapers in Tucson were calling it the bloodiest summer in territorial history. But Samuel Turner had always been a fool for lost causes. He grabbed his Winchester rifle, checked the chamber with practiced efficiency, and began climbing the treacherous slope toward the source of the screams. Each footstep sent loose shale tumbling into the abyss below, creating tiny avalanches that seemed to announce his presence to every living creature for miles around. The desert heat pressed down on him like a physical weight, and sweat streamed down his face, mixing with the ever-present dust that coated everything in this godforsaken land. As he crested the ridge, the scene below struck him like a physical blow. 3 young Apache women, their traditional deerskin dresses torn and bloodied, were trapped in a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders. But they weren't alone. 4 men in the blue uniforms of the territorial cavalry stood around them, their weapons drawn, their faces twisted with an ugliness that had nothing to do with the brutal heat. "Please," one of the women pleaded in broken English, her voice barely audible over the desert wind. "We do nothing wrong. We gather medicine plants for sick children." The sergeant, a thick-set man with cruel eyes and whiskey on his breath even in this heat, spat into the sand. "Medicine plants, hell. You're Apache spies, every damn one of you. After what your people did to the Morrison family last week, we're gonna make sure you never spy on white folks again." Sam's blood ran cold as he recognized the lie. He'd been at the Morrison ranch the day before the attack, and old Morrison himself had told him it was Comanche raiders, not Apache, who'd been spotted in the area. These soldiers were hunting for revenge against the wrong people, and they were about to commit cold-blooded murder to get it. The youngest of the women, barely more than a girl, began to sing softly in Apache, her voice rising and falling like a prayer or perhaps a death song. The haunting melody seemed to make the very air shimmer with ancient power, and Sam felt something stir deep in his chest, something that had been dormant since he'd lost his own family to cholera 3 years ago. "Shut that heathen noise up," the sergeant snarled, raising his rifle. "I don't want to hear no Indian magic before I send you to hell." Sam had perhaps 10 seconds to make a choice that would define the rest of his life, however long that might be. 4 trained soldiers against 1 broken-down prospector with more debts than sense. The odds were impossible, the situation hopeless, and every logical thought in his head told him to turn around and pretend he'd never seen anything. Instead, he stood up from his hiding place behind the rocks and called out in a voice that carried across the canyon like thunder. "That's far enough, boys." The soldiers spun around as one, their weapons swinging toward this unexpected threat. Sam kept his rifle trained on the sergeant while his mind raced through calculations of angles, cover positions, and the bitter mathematics of survival. The 3 Apache women stared at him with expressions of shock and disbelief, as if a ghost had materialized from the desert air. Well, the sergeant drawled, his initial surprise giving way to a predatory grin. "Looks like we got ourselves a Apache lover. You best move along, prospector, before you get yourself hurt. This here's official cavalry business." "Official business?" Sam's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Murdering unarmed women gathering medicine plants? That the kind of official business they're teaching at West Point these days?" The tension in the air became almost palpable, like the charged atmosphere before a lightning strike. Sam could see the soldiers weighing their options, calculating whether it was worth it to add the murder of a white man to their planned atrocity. He could also see something else in their eyes that gave him a sliver of hope, uncertainty. They were far from their post, operating without orders, and the presence of a witness complicated their simple plan. "You don't understand the situation here, friend," one of the younger soldiers said, his voice shaking slightly. "These Apache, they're dangerous. They killed the Morrison family, butchered them like animals. We're just making sure they don't kill nobody else." "The Morrison family was killed by Comanche," Sam replied steadily, never taking his eyes off the sergeant. "Morrison told me so himself the day before he died. Said he saw their war paint, recognized the style. You boys are about to murder innocent women for crimes they didn't commit." The lie hit its mark. Sam could see doubt creeping into the faces of the younger soldiers, the kind of doubt that could be the difference between life and death in a situation balanced on a knife's edge. But the sergeant's expression only hardened with renewed determination. "You calling me a liar, Prospector?" "I'm calling you a coward," Sam said quietly. "A man who hides behind a uniform to murder defenseless women because he's too yellow to face actual warriors." The insult hung in the desert air like a challenge to single combat. Sam had pushed the sergeant past the point of rational thought and into the realm of wounded pride, which was exactly where he wanted him. An angry man makes mistakes, and in a gunfight, mistakes are usually fatal. The sergeant's face flushed red with rage, and his hand moved toward his sidearm. "You son of a—" The crack of Sam's Winchester split the desert silence like a thunderbolt. The bullet caught the sergeant in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol flying into the rocks. Before the other soldiers could react, Sam had already levered another round into the chamber and was swinging his rifle toward the next target. "Drop your weapons," he commanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Drop them now, or the next shot won't be a warning." For a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, the tableau held, for soldiers with weapons half-raised, 3 Apache women frozen in terrified silence, and one desperate prospector with a rifle that might as well have been a magic wand for all the impossible things he was asking it to do. Then the spell broke, and chaos erupted in the canyon. The youngest soldier, panic overriding training, brought his rifle up toward Sam. The Apache women screamed. The wounded sergeant was cursing and trying to retrieve his fallen weapon with his good arm. And Samuel Turner, a man who had never killed anything larger than a rabbit, found himself fighting for his life and the lives of 3 strangers whose names he didn't even know. His second shot took the young soldier in the leg, sending him tumbling into the rocks. His third shot went wide as he dove for cover behind a boulder, bullets from the remaining 2 soldiers chipping stone fragments around his head. The sound of gunfire echoed through the canyon like the voice of God himself, and Sam knew that every Apache within miles would be riding toward the sound with blood in their eyes. "You're dead, Prospector," the sergeant shouted, his voice thick with pain and fury. "You're dead, and so are those Apache whores." Sam pressed his back against the boulder and tried to count his remaining ammunition while bullets whined overhead. 6 shots left in the Winchester, and after that, only his Colt revolver with 5 rounds. Against trained soldiers with military weapons and all the time in the world. But as he prepared for what might be his last stand, he heard something that changed everything, the sound of Apache war cries echoing from the canyon walls, growing closer with each passing second. The cavalry had come looking for Apache blood, and they were about to get more than they bargained for. "Listen," one of the remaining soldiers whispered urgently. "You hear that? We need to get out of here, right now." But it was already too late. The desert that had been empty moments before was suddenly alive with shadows moving between the rocks, with the whisper of moccasins on stone, with the barely audible sound of bowstrings being drawn. The Apache had arrived, and they had found white soldiers threatening their women. Sam Turner had saved 3 lives, but in doing so, he might have just signed his own death warrant. Because in Apache territory, sometimes the only thing more dangerous than being the enemy was being caught in the middle when the shooting started. The war cries grew louder, closer, and Sam closed his eyes for a moment, wondering if his mother's prayers had followed him all the way to this godforsaken canyon, and whether they would be enough to see him through whatever came next. The desert held its breath, waiting for blood. The Apache warriors materialized from the desert like spirits of vengeance, their painted faces masks of controlled fury as they surveyed the scene before them. Sam counted at least 20 braves, their weapons trained not just on the remaining soldiers, but on him as well. He was still an outsider, still a white man with a smoking rifle in Apache territory, and the fact that he had intervened meant nothing until proven otherwise. The leader of the war party was a man Sam recognized from wanted posters in every territorial town, Nailnish, known to the whites as Red Hawk, a war chief whose very name could empty saloons and send grown men reaching for their weapons. He was younger than Sam had expected, perhaps 40, with a face carved from stone and eyes that seemed to see straight through to a man's soul. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from the Battle of Apache Pass where he had earned his reputation as a warrior who preferred death to surrender. Red Hawk's gaze moved slowly from the wounded soldiers to the three women, and Sam saw something flicker across his features that might have been relief. When the eldest of the women began speaking rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward Sam, the war chief's expression became unreadable. "Ayana," Red Hawk said quietly, and the woman fell silent. His voice carried absolute authority, the kind that comes from years of making life-and-death decisions for his people. "Tell me what happened here." The woman Sam now knew as Ayana spoke in rapid Apache, her words tumbling over each other as she recounted the events. Sam caught enough of the language to understand she was explaining how the soldiers had cornered them, how they had been preparing to kill them, and how the strange white prospector had risked his life to save them. But he also heard something else in her voice, confusion, as if she couldn't quite believe what had happened herself. Red Hawk listened without interruption, his dark eyes never leaving Sam's face. When Ayana finished, he turned to the youngest of the women and asked her to repeat the story. Sam realized he was verifying the account, making sure there were no inconsistencies that might suggest deception or coercion. The wounded sergeant, still clutching his bleeding shoulder, chose that moment to make the worst decision of his rapidly shortening life. "Don't listen to them lying Apache bitches," he snarled, spitting blood into the sand. "They're spies, every damn one of them. This prospector's in league with them. Probably been selling information about our patrols." The silence that followed was more terrifying than any war cry. Red Hawk's hand moved almost casually to the obsidian-bladed knife at his belt, and Sam saw several of the warriors shift their positions, readying themselves for violence. The tension in the air became so thick it was almost difficult to breathe. "You speak of lies," Red Hawk said in heavily accented but perfect English, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I see the truth written in blood and gunpowder. I see my daughters alive because of this man's bullets, not his betrayal." Daughters. The word hit Sam like a physical blow. These weren't just any Apache women he had saved. They were Red Hawk's daughters, which meant that by Apache law and custom, he had just created a blood debt that would follow him for the rest of his life. "The Morrison family," the sergeant began desperately. "Was killed by Comanche from the Llano Estacado," Red Hawk interrupted, his voice cutting through the desert air like a blade. "I know this because I spoke with Morrison 2 days before his death. He came to our camp under a white flag, seeking to trade horses. He told me of Comanche sign he had seen, war paint and patterns my people have not used for generations. You seek revenge against the wrong nation." Sam felt the pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Red Hawk had known the truth all along, which meant these soldiers weren't just making a mistake, they were operating on their own, outside of official orders, pursuing a personal vendetta that had nothing to do with justice. The youngest soldier, the one Sam had wounded in the leg, began to sob quietly. "We just wanted to make them pay," he whispered. "The Morrison kids, they were just babies. We couldn't let it stand." "So you decided to murder innocent women to balance the scales of your grief?" Red Hawk's voice carried a note of something that might have been pity. "This is the white man's justice? This is what you call civilization?" Sam found his voice for the first time since the Apache had arrived. "Not all of us," he said quietly. "Some of us still remember the difference between justice and revenge." Red Hawk's attention turned fully to him then, and Sam felt the weight of that ancient gaze like a physical presence. "You are Samuel Turner," the war chief said, and it wasn't a question. "The man who works the failed silver mine in Bear Canyon. The man whose family died of the spotted sickness 3 winters ago." The fact that Red Hawk knew his personal history shouldn't have surprised Sam. The Apache were legendary for their intelligence gathering, but it still sent a chill down his spine. In Apache territory, being known could be either salvation or a death sentence, depending on your reputation. "You know me," Sam acknowledged. "But I don't know why that matters." "It matters because for 3 years, you have worked your claim without trespassing on our hunting grounds. It matters because you have never sold whiskey to our young men or weapons to our enemies. It matters because when the Blue soldiers came through your canyon seeking information about our movements, you told them you had seen nothing." Sam remembered those encounters, half a dozen times when cavalry patrols had stopped at his mine seeking intelligence about Apache activity. He had indeed told them nothing, partly because he genuinely rarely saw Apache in his remote canyon, but mostly because he had learned to mind his own business in a land where curiosity could get a man killed. "I just wanted to be left alone," Sam said honestly. "And yet when my daughters cried out in fear, you did not leave them alone," Red Hawk replied. "You risked your life for women of a people your race considers enemies. Why?" It was a question Sam had been asking himself since he'd first heard those screams. Why had he intervened? Why had he thrown away 3 years of carefully maintained neutrality for 3 strangers? The answer, when it came to him, was both simple and terrifying. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "Because I have a daughter buried in Illinois, and I couldn't stand by and watch somebody else's daughters die if I could prevent it." Something shifted in Red Hawk's expression, a subtle softening that suggested Sam had passed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. The war chief spoke briefly in Apache to his warriors, and several of them lowered their weapons slightly. "There is a debt between us now," Red Hawk announced. "A life debt that must be honored according to the ancient ways. But this debt cannot be settled with gold or horses or cattle. The lives you saved belong to my bloodline, and so the debt touches the very heart of my family's honor." Sam had heard enough stories about Apache customs to know this wasn't going to end with a simple handshake and an invitation to Sunday dinner. Life debts among the Apache were serious matters, bound up with concepts of honor and reciprocity that went back generations. "What does that mean?" he asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. "It means," Red Hawk said slowly, "that you must choose how this debt will be repaid. But not here, not now, with the blood of these soldiers fresh on the ground. You will come to our camp at dawn tomorrow, alone and unarmed, and there I will present you with 3 paths. Each path will test different aspects of your character, and each will demand a different price. Choose wisely, Samuel Turner, for your choice will echo through both our peoples for generations to come." The remaining soldiers were backing away slowly, clearly hoping to escape while the Apache attention was focused on Sam. Red Hawk noticed their movement but made no effort to stop them. "Go," he told them dismissively. "Return to your post and tell your commanders what happened here. Tell them that Red Hawk protected innocent women from soldiers who forgot their honor. Tell them that if they want war, they should fight warriors, not murder mothers and daughters." The soldiers needed no further encouragement. They gathered their wounded comrades and began the long, painful journey back to civilization, casting fearful glances over their shoulders as they stumbled across the desert floor. Red Hawk turned back to Sam, and for the first time, something resembling respect flickered in his dark eyes. "You have bought their lives with your courage, but courage alone will not be enough for what comes next. The choice I will offer you tomorrow will require more than bravery. It will require wisdom, sacrifice, and an understanding of honor that goes deeper than the white man's laws." "And if I don't come?" Sam asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then the debt remains unpaid, and my honor remains stained. I will be forced to seek you out and collect what is owed, one way or another." Red Hawk's voice carried no threat, just the simple statement of an inevitable fact. "But I do not think you are a man who runs from his obligations." Sam looked at the 3 women, who were watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. They were alive because of his actions, but he was beginning to understand that saving their lives had been the easy part. Living with the consequences was going to be far more difficult. "Where do I find your camp?" he asked. Red Hawk smiled then, the first genuine expression of emotion Sam had seen from him. "You do not find us, Samuel Turner. We will find you. Be ready at dawn." The Apache war party melted back into the desert as quickly as they had appeared, taking the 3 women with them. Within minutes, Sam was alone in the canyon with only the bloodstains in the sand and the echo of gunshots to prove that any of it had really happened. He made his way slowly back to his mine as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, his mind racing with possibilities and implications. Tomorrow, he would face a choice that could determine not just his own fate, but potentially the relationship between 2 peoples balanced on the knife's edge of war. That night, as he sat by his small campfire and cleaned his rifle, Sam Turner wondered what his wife would have thought of the man he had become. Would she have been proud of his courage, or horrified by the violence he had done? Would she have understood the strange honor code that now bound him to a Apache war chief, or would she have begged him to saddle his mule and ride hard for the territorial capital? The desert wind carried the scent of sage and the distant sound of coyotes calling to the rising moon. Somewhere out there, Red Hawk was preparing 3 choices that would test everything Sam believed about honor, sacrifice, and the true meaning of courage. As dawn approached, Samuel Turner prepared to learn whether saving 3 lives had been the beginning of his redemption, or the first step toward his destruction. The desert would have its answer soon enough.